Studios.
Before we begin, a content warning. This episode contains discussions of murder, violence, and trauma. Listener discretion is advised. The following story is drawn from public records, historical reporting, and community accounts. Some victim names and identifying details have been changed to protect privacy. Where the historical record contains gaps, certain narrative elements have been carefully reconstructed for clarity. Legal outcomes are described as they are recorded at the time of trial. In this episode, we're going to another small Appalachia town, Marion, Virginia, and it's September of 1996. Labor Day has just passed. Kids are back in school. The summer heat is starting to break, and life in Smyth County is settling back into its pre-fall rhythm. Then a neighbor decided to go check on Mary Sue Collins. Mary, a retired school teacher, somebody's Sunday school teacher, somebody's neighbor, a woman a lot of people in this county grew up knowing. She hadn't been seen, hadn't answered her phone, and in a town like Marion, where people start to notice things, where a missed Sunday at church means something, that kind of silence doesn't sit well, especially among friends and neighbors. So they knocked, and when no one came to the door, they called the police. And what the police later reported finding inside that house on that September day shook this small mountain community to its core. Before we get into this episode, if you're drawn to true stories from Appalachia, the kind rooted in history, folklore, crime, and things that people don't always say out loud, then you're in the right place. This is Roots and Shadows, the Real Appalachia podcast. We release new episodes every Saturday. And if you decide to stay, go ahead and press that follow button. That way these stories don't have to come looking for you. Never been to Marion, Virginia, let me paint a picture for you. It sits in Smyth County, tucked into the valley of the middle fork of the Holston River, with Clinch Mountain rising up to the north and the Iron Mountains to the south. It's the kind of place where the mountains don't just sit in the background. They're part of everything. The way the light shines on the treetops in the morning. The way the fog drifts down into the hollers before it burns it off. The way the roads wind through them like they were put there by the mountains themselves. Not the other way around. Marion is the county seat of Smyth County, and if you've spent any time in Southwest Virginia, you know the name. It's a small town, sitting right along U.S. Highway 11, one of those old roads that connected communities long before the interstate came through. It has a beautiful downtown, the kind of main street you don't see much of anymore, brick storefronts, old buildings that have been standing longer than anyone can remember, the kind of place where people still know the person behind the counter. If the name Marion rings a bell for a different reason, it might be because of this. Marion, Virginia is widely recognized as the birthplace of modern Mountain Dew. That's right, that bright yellow-green drink that's practically its own food group in Appalachia got its start right here in Smyth County. Created back in the 1940s, the popular soft drink was reformulated to what it is known today by Marion resident Bill Jones. And if that doesn't tell you something about this part of the world, I don't know what will. Just outside of town, you've got Hungry Mother State Park, one of the oldest state parks in Virginia, sitting on a lake surrounded by ridge lines that turn every color you can imagine come fall. And if you ride motorcycles, you may already know that Marion is the southern end of the Back of the Dragon, Route 16, one of the most well-known motorcycle routes on the East Coast. 32 miles of curves through some of the most beautiful mountain terrain this region has to offer. So that's Marion. A small mountain town with deep roots, a tight-knit community, and the kind of character that takes a lifetime to build. And like most places in Appalachia, it carries its own stories too, and it carries them close. Some of them are kind you brag about, and some of them are the kind that stay with the community long after everything else moves on. Mary Sue Collins had lived in this community long enough that most people didn't need an introduction to her. She was a retired elementary school teacher, and she had spent her career in the Smyth County school system. Years in the classroom. Decades, really. Long enough that when you start talking about her in the county, People just don't nod politely. They actually remember her. They remember having her as a teacher, or their kids having her, or even their grandkids. She taught 5th grade. And if you think about what that means for a moment, a 5th grade teacher in a small county school system, teaching long enough that multiple generations of the same families came through her classroom, you start to understand the kind of footprint she left in this place. But she didn't stop when the school year ended, and she didn't disappear when she retired. That's the thing about Mary. She stayed involved. She was active in her church. She was part of the hospital auxiliary, volunteer work that keeps a community running without anyone stopping to notice. She was connected to the country club, part of the civic life of this town in the way that people who genuinely care about a place tend to be. She was the kind of woman who showed up. For decades, she had shown up for the children in her classroom, for the families in her church, for the community organizations she believed in. And on September 4th, 1996, it was a neighbor who showed up for her, because something wasn't right. And what was found inside her home on that warm September evening was something this small mountain community has never forgotten. On September 3rd, 1996, Marion woke up the way southwestern Virginia does in early September. Summer trying to hold on, but starting to lose its grip. The kind of day where it is still warm. It hit 75 degrees that Tuesday, but there's something in the air that tells you the season is turning. And the rain had moved in that morning. Not a hard rain, not a storm, just enough to settle into the ground and to remind you that fall was coming, whether you were ready for it or not. For Mary, it meant her golf game wasn't happening. She was a member of the country club, and golf had become one of those regular rhythms in her retirement. The kind of thing you look forward to, plan your week around. But the rain had other ideas that day. So instead of the course, she ended up at the club for lunch with friends. And if you've ever had lunch with someone like Mary, someone who had spent over 30 years in an elementary school classroom, someone who stayed plugged into everything this community had going on, you know that lunch wasn't just a dull affair. There was conversation. There was catching up. There was laughter, probably. And somewhere in the middle of it all, she mentioned she was going to bake a cobbler. A friend of hers was under the weather, and that was just the kind of thing Mary Sue did. You were sick? She brought you something. You needed help? She showed up. It didn't matter that she was retired. It didn't matter that she had plenty of her own things going on. That's just who she was. So after lunch, she went home. And that evening, around 8 o'clock, her friend called her to thank her for the cobbler. That was the last time anyone could confirm speaking with Mary. She had plans for the next day. She was supposed to meet her sister over in nearby Russell County. Not an unusual thing. Family plans, the kind you make without thinking twice about, the kind you expect to keep. But Mary never made it. When she didn't show up, her sister started calling. Once, then again after that. Still no answer. Now, in a lot of places, you might wait a little longer before you worried. Maybe she got held up. Maybe she forgot. Maybe she just stepped out. But this was Marion, and Mary Sue Collins was not the kind of woman who forgot. She was not the kind of woman who left people waiting without a word. Her whole life had been built around showing up, for her students, for her church, for her community. That's not a habit you break. So when she didn't answer, her sister called people in Marion. And those people did what people do in small towns. They went to check on her. 2 neighbors made their way over to her home. It was late, around 10:30 at night by the time they got there. And they found the kitchen door unlocked. That alone would have felt wrong. Mary kept an immaculate home. The kind of woman who had routines, who kept things in order, who locked her doors. They noticed things inside the house that were out of place. And when they tried her phone, the phone was dead. And right then, before anyone had said it out loud, before anyone had confirmed what they were afraid of, I think those 2 neighbors already knew that something had gone wrong inside that house. So they called the police. Marion police responded to her house that night. And what they found when they stepped inside that home, what they found in that house that had always been so carefully kept, so welcoming, so full of life of a woman this community had known and counted on for decades, was something that nobody in this town was prepared for. Mary Sue Collins was found dead. The community that had known her as a teacher, as a Sunday school superintendent, as a golf partner, as a friend who showed up with a cobbler when you weren't feeling well, that community was about to find out just how dark a September night in Marion, Virginia, could get. What happened inside that house was not random, at least not according to investigators. Investigators reported finding evidence of a search, that things had been ransacked, drawers pulled out, things moved. Someone had gone through that home looking for whatever they could take. A small amount of cash, a jewelry box, things that wouldn't amount to much in the end, but enough to tell you that whoever came into Mary's home that night came in with a purpose. Investigators also reported that her telephone wires had been cut, and what they did to her before she died was unspeakable. Mary Sue Collins was assaulted. She was strangled with her own robe. And at 68 years old, 32 years in a classroom, a woman who had spent her entire adult life given to other people, and in her final moments, she was alone in her own home, and someone took everything from her. When the details started making their way through Marion, and in a town of about 6,600 people, they always do, something shifted. You could feel it, the way people locked their doors a little earlier, the way women who lived alone started paying attention to the things they never thought twice about before. The sound of a car slowing down outside, a shadow moving past a window, a knock at the door after dark. Marion's mayor put it plainly. He told reporters that after Mary's death, other women living alone began to worry that they too could become prey for the killer. Prey, that's the word he used, and it landed the way the truth has always landed, heavy and without an apology. Because that's what it felt like in Marion in those first days after September 4th, 1996. This wasn't a town where you expected this. This wasn't a place where people locked themselves inside and feared their neighbors. Marion was the kind of town where you knew the person who waved at you from across the street, where you recognized the cars in the driveways, where a woman could spend 40 years building a life and expect that life to mean something to the people around her. And it did mean something. That was exactly the problem. Because if this could happen to Mary Sue Collins, someone this known, this woven into the fabric of this community, this present in the lives of people around her, then who was safe? She wasn't isolated. She wasn't hidden away. She lived on a street near the hospital where she volunteered, near the church where she had just agreed to serve as assistant Sunday school superintendent. She was found by her neighbors, called in by her sister, worried over by an entire town, and none of it had been enough. The phone lines were cut. The kitchen door had been unlocked from the outside. Investigators believed this showed planning, and when it was over, whoever was responsible may have walked back into the same community it was about to spend the next several days grieving, the woman they left behind. And they were still out there, somewhere in Marion, Virginia, where everybody knows everybody, where you can't get a haircut without running into someone you know. The person who did this was still walking around. The possibility that they were still nearby, and this town wasn't going to rest until someone found them. In a town like Marion, grief and action have a way of moving together. People weren't just mourning Mary Sue Collins. They were angry, and that anger had to go somewhere. Within days of her body being found, the phone started ringing. Tips, names, things people had seen, things people had heard, neighbors talking to neighbors, and then picking up the phone and calling it in. In a community that small, information moves fast, and when the whole town is paying attention, it moves even faster. But tips alone don't solve a case. You need people who know what to do with them. A Salem, Virginia-based Virginia State Police investigator, trained in criminal profiling at the FBI Academy, was brought in to organize what would become something this part of Virginia had never quite seen before. A full multi-agency task force pulling together the Marion Police Department, the Smyth County Sheriff's Office, and the Virginia State Police under one roof, working one case. They set up operations in the basement of the county courthouse. A former Board of Supervisors meeting room became their command center. They brought in the state police mobile crime lab, 5 or 6 technicians who gathered, tagged, and logged every piece of evidence from that house, sending it all back to the lab in Roanoke. And they installed a tip line. That phone did not stop ringing. An investigator with the Marion Police Department was one of the men at the center of it. His daughter had been a student at one of the schools where Mary taught. This wasn't just a case to him. It was personal in the way that cases in small towns almost always are. We get personally involved with it because we live here, he said. We're raising our families here. Every morning, the task force met. Every midday, they met again, going over everything they had, checking in with the lab, comparing notes, chasing down every thread the community had handed them. And the community had handed them a lot. We talked to something like 90 people, the investigator said. We had a good response from the community. They went overboard. Overboard in the best possible way, because this town wasn't going to sit on the sideline while someone who had done what was done to Mary Sue Collins walked free. These were people who had been in her classroom, people who had sat beside her in a church pew, people who had eaten lunch with her the day before she died. They were going to help, every single one of them. And it moved the investigation forward. Within 24 hours of the task force being assembled, not days, not weeks, 24 hours, investigators had zeroed in on a suspect. Harold David Davis, 23 years old, a laborer from Marion. He had done work around Mary's home, and as investigators started pulling on that thread, things started coming apart fast. On September 11th, 1996, 1 week after Mary Sue Collins was found, Marion's mayor happened to be outside his home when he noticed a commotion on an intersecting street. Police were surrounding a truck. Harold David Davis was taken into custody that morning, charged with capital murder, rape, and burglary. And in Virginia, in 1996, a capital murder conviction carries the possibility of the death penalty. A $500,000 bond was set. And then, the very next day, a second name surfaced. Joshua David Widener, 17 years old, also from Marion. The charges against Widener would grow from there. 2 men, 2 arrests, 1 week apart from the crime. Marion had its suspects. And just for a moment, just a brief moment, it felt like maybe this was going to be straightforward, like maybe the worst of it was behind them, like maybe the answers were starting to finally take shape. But then the statements came in, and nothing about this case would be straightforward again. Here is something that sometimes happens in these cases. 2 people get arrested, and then they both start talking. And when they do, each one has their own version of what happened, and often each points to the other. And that's what happened here. Both of them gave statements. Both of them cooperated in their own way, and both of them told investigators essentially the same story, but with one critical difference. According to both of their statements, 1 man went through the kitchen window. 1 man stood watch outside. 1 man found Mary Sue Collins at home when she wasn't supposed to be there. 1 man threatened her, tied her up, assaulted her. Davis said it was Widener. Widener said it was Davis. Same house, same night, same details, almost word for word, just with the name swapped out. According to Davis, the whole thing started because he had been doing work around Mary Sue's home and thought he had overheard that she would be out of town. He said they planned the break-in together, that it was Widener who climbed through the kitchen window while Davis waited outside, that Widener came out with $5 in cash, then went back in for the jewelry box, and Davis claimed that later, Widener told him he had found her at home, tied her up, forced himself on her, but that she was still alive when he left. That detail matters, because Davis wasn't just pointing the finger. His statement placed him outside the home. He was saying, I was outside. I didn't touch her. Whatever happened in there, that was him. Widener's statement told the story in reverse. It was Davis who went through the window. Davis who came out with the jewelry box. Davis who admitted to what he did to her inside that house. And Widener who stood outside, who waited, who, in his own telling, had no idea what was happening on the other side of that wall. Two statements, two men, two completely different versions of who did what. The jewelry box was recovered near their home. Not far, not hidden, just discarded, like it had been dropped in a hurry or thrown without thinking. And both men had mentioned it. Both men had worked it into their version of events. Which means, whatever else they disagreed on, that jewelry box was real. That part of the night happened exactly the way both of them described it. Which suggests they were both there. Whatever one of them did, and whatever the other one claims he didn't, both of their statements place them at the house on the night Mary Sue Collins died. And then came the DNA. Forensic testing showed traces of DNA consistent with Joshua Widener recovered from Mary Sue Collins' body. Not Davis, but Widener. That's not a small detail. That is the kind of evidence that changes the shape of a case. And if you took that alone, you might think, well, there it is. That's your answer. But investigators looked at something else. Found in the bedroom where Mary Sue Collins' body was discovered was an earring. And here's what made it significant. Mary Sue Collins did not have pierced ears. The earring did not belong to her, and Joshua Widener, investigators noted, did not have pierced ears either. But Davis did. So what you're left with is this. DNA consistent with Widener, recovered from the victim. DNA consistent with Davis, recovered from the earring found in the room where she died. Two statements that are mirror images of each other, with each describing the other as responsible. And a woman who went through something in her own home that the Commonwealth's attorney would later describe as outrageous. A word he chose, deliberately, after reading every detail of what she endured. Two men's statements placed them there that night. The evidence connected both of them to the case. But the full truth of what happened inside that house, who did what, who made which decision, who was responsible for which moment in that terrible chain of events, is something that has never been clearly established. Not in their statements, not in court, not in the nearly 30 years since. And Mary Sue Collins cannot tell us. She is the only one who experienced everything that happened in that house. And she's been gone since September of 1996. When a case like this gets to court, there are really only two ways it can go. You fight it, or you don't. Harold David Davis, he didn't fight it. In 1997, Davis entered a guilty plea, and in cases like this, a guilty plea can mean avoiding the death penalty. Virginia had the death penalty in 1997, and Harold David Davis was facing a capital murder charge. The kind of charge that, if it goes to trial and you lose, can end up with you strapped to a table in Greensville Correctional Center. So, Davis pleaded guilty, and in exchange, he avoided the death penalty. He was sentenced to 3 life terms, no possibility of parole, no chance of walking out of prison and back into the world that Mary Sue Collins used to live in. 3 life sentences. For a man, even in his own statement, stated he was outside of the home while the worst of it happened. Whether the court believed that or not, the outcome was the same. Harold David Davis would spend the rest of his life behind bars. And then there was Joshua Widener, 17 years old at the time of the crime, 18 by the time the legal process caught up with him, young enough that his case moved through the juvenile system before landing in adult court. But Widener did not plead guilty. He took his case to trial. And in 1998, a judge heard the evidence. He heard about the DNA recovered from Mary Sue Collins' body, consistent with Widener. He heard about the earring found in that bedroom, consistent with Davis. He had heard the Commonwealth attorneys describe what Mary had endured before she died. And he convicted him. Joshua David Widener was found guilty of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison. 2 men, 2 outcomes that arrive at the same place. Both of them were going to grow old behind prison walls. And for Marion, Virginia, for the community that had known Mary Sue Collins for decades, that had flooded a tip line and talked to investigators and grieved together in the weeks after her death, there was something in those verdicts that felt like the closest thing to justice they were going to get. Not complete. Nothing about this case was ever going to feel complete. The years passed. Marion kept going, the way small towns do. The schools kept running. The church on the corner kept its doors open. The country club kept its tea times. Life moved forward, the way it always does, even after something terrible tries to stop it. And inside the Virginia prison system, Harold David Davis and Joshua David Widener got older. But something changed in Virginia, something that would eventually apply to one of them. In 2020, Virginia changed its parole laws. It opened the door, just a little, for some people serving life sentences to be reviewed. Under that change, anyone who committed a crime before the age of 18 could become eligible for parole after serving 20 years. And that made Widener one of them. In 2021, the Virginia Parole Board reviewed Widener's case. Denied. The parole board citing the reason as serious nature and circumstances of the offense. And most recently again in 2025, nearly 30 years after Mary Sue Collins was found in her home, the board looked at his case again. Denied. Again. And I want to sit with that for just a moment. Because there are people who hear that and feel relieved. And there are people, maybe people who believe in rehabilitation, who look at a 17-year-old boy and wonder who he became over the 3 decades behind bars, who will feel something more complicated. Both of those responses are honest. But here's what doesn't change, no matter how you feel about those decisions. The question that's followed this case, since the moments those 2 statements were read aloud in a Virginia courtroom, has never really been answered. Who went through that window? Who found her? Who made the decisions that led to the end of Mary Sue Collins' life? Davis said it was Widener. Widener said it was Davis. The DNA evidence was connected to both of them, one in one place, one in another. But the truth, the full truth of what happened inside that house that night, has never been clearly established by anyone who was actually there. 2 men remain in Virginia prisons today. They're the only ones who can fully account for what happened inside that house. And Mary Sue Collins, the woman who taught 5th grade for 32 years, who baked a cobbler for a sick friend, who agreed to step in and help because someone asked her to, who lived her life the same way, day after day, in a place where people knew her. She deserved better than the answer this case gave her. She deserved the truth. And here in Appalachia, the roots run deep. They're built on people like her, the ones who show up, the ones who teach generations, the ones who become part of a place, whether they mean to or not. But the shadows come from the things that don't get said, the things that don't get answered, the things that a community carries, even when it tries to move on. And in this case, those roots and those shadows crossed in a way that nobody in Marion will ever forget. Because one of the men who sit in that courtroom, one of the men who gave those statements, had once sat somewhere else, in Mary's classroom. Joshua David Widener, who was 17 years old at the time this happened, and is now serving multiple life sentences for capital murder, had been one of Mary's 5th grade students. This has been Roots and Shadows, the Real Appalachia podcast, where every root tells a story and every shadow hides one.